Rachel Morgan quietly approached the VIP table where Victor Langston sat with his assistant, Eric Dalton. The wealthy man gave her just one glance before spitting out a few words in German, certain that a poor woman like her couldn't possibly understand. "This restaurant really is a mess, hiring servers like this," Victor sneered, his chin tilted arrogantly. Rachel bent slightly about to take the order, but he shoved the menu back toward her, his eyes cold. "Let's hope you can remember these dishes." Eric burst out laughing, his laughter so loud it drowned the soft jazz drifting through the room. But when Rachel returned with the appetizer, she gently placed it on the table and replied in precise German, "This is exactly the recipe you praised in Berlin last May." Victor froze, the smile wiped from his lips. Several nearby tables turned to look. Rachel stood upright, her hands steady as she poured water into a crystal glass without the slightest tremor. "I'm very glad you are here today. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you can join us in discovering many inspiring stories where truth and courage always shine." And now let's step together into this special story. The upscale restaurant was in New York, chandeliers casting a warm golden glow. Gentle jazz filled the air, white tablecloths lay crisp as if freshly ironed that morning. Rachel's black uniform was frayed at the cuffs, her brown hair tied neatly into a bun. No makeup, no jewelry, only a simple silver watch ticking evenly on her wrist. Amidst a room full of glittering gowns and radiant diamonds, she seemed not to belong. To others, she was nothing but plain, even ordinary. Everyone assumed she was just a small girl struggling to survive. But they didn't know Rachel had once been born into luxury, raised in a family that held half the financial sky, trained in discipline and quiet poise. She needed to prove nothing. She simply lived as she was. And tonight, in this room full of those who judged by appearances, Rachel would show them who she really was without raising her voice. Victor Langston leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit so sharply cut, it seemed it could slice through air. He was a German billionaire, the sort of man whose very entrance commanded every gaze. Eric Dalton, his wiry assistant, wore a crooked smirk glued to his face, his eyes always darting. Victor no longer bothered to look at Rachel, instead muttering in German to Eric, voice low but dripping with contempt. "She probably doesn't understand a single word. Tell the kitchen to hurry up. I don't want my time wasted." Eric chuckled, his eyes scanning Rachel's worn uniform as if trying to strip away her entire life. But Rachel didn't waver. She set the menu on the table, her finger grazing the edge, then answered softly, "Yes, sir," her voice almost overly polite. Yet for a fleeting moment, Rachel's eyes flashed cold before she turned away. The restaurant that evening was lively, each table crowded with people who treated money as a mere toy. Nearby, a woman in a velvet red dress leaned over to whisper, "Is this server new? She looks like she wandered in from a diner." The man beside her, his wrist flashing with a luxury watch, chuckled without lifting his gaze from his phone. Rachel carried a tray of martinis past them, her step steady, balance perfect. She had heard far crueler words before. Since childhood, her parents had taught her to hold her head high. Her father, a financial magnate. Her mother, a diplomat, fluent in 5 languages. They raised her never to let anyone see her break. And Rachel never did. She continued, face serene, hands steady. Yet the air in the room grew heavier. Everyone seemed to be waiting for her to stumble. At that moment, from another table, a man in a pinstripe suit with a loosened tie called out loudly, "Hey girl, you forgot the lemon twist for my drink. Didn't they teach you that in server school?" The entire table laughed, glasses clinking. Rachel froze briefly, still holding the glass. She turned, replying softly, "My apologies, sir," her eyes meeting his directly without flinching. She went to the bar, returned with a perfectly cut lemon wedge, set it before him with a small nod. The man pressed his lips together, unsettled by her calmness, muttered something under his breath, and sat down. But the atmosphere in the room was like a taut string ready to snap. Victor wouldn't let it pass. He called Rachel back, his voice booming as if he wanted the whole room to hear, "Let's test how good your memory really is," he said in German, rattling off 3 dishes at thunderous speed. Eric jumped in immediately, adding sides: roasted asparagus, truffle, mashed potatoes, salad, with a custom dressing. He sneered as if issuing a challenge. "Don't mix it up now." A few people nearby burst out laughing, turning to watch. Rachel stood still, the notepad and pen still in her apron pocket. She wrote nothing. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft as a breeze. Then Rachel turned, walking away slowly, each step measured, leaving behind a trail of eyes, half mocking, half tense with expectation. Years ago, Rachel Morgan once sat in a bright lecture hall in Berlin, sunlight streaming through the tall windows while her classmates scribbled notes frantically as the professor lectured on global trade deficits. She, however, always stood out, never rushed, yet grasped everything completely. Rachel had once been the star of the International Economics program, fluent in 4 languages, quick-witted, able to untangle problems that left others struggling. She loved the fiery debates, the sleepless nights spent with friends preparing for presentations. Professors always nodded approvingly when she spoke. Her future had seemed to stretch endlessly before her, but then her mother, Maggie Morgan, fell gravely ill with cancer. Without hesitation, Rachel left it all behind: the degree, her apartment in Berlin, the dreams just beginning to bloom. She packed her suitcase and flew back to the United States to be with her mother. No explanations, no complaints. She simply chose family. Now, as Rachel walked through the restaurant kitchen filled with the clatter of pans, knives, striking cutting boards, and chefs shouting, that past felt like a distant dream. Yet it still lived on in the way she observed, in the calmness, in every step she took. When she returned to Victor Langston and Eric Dalton's table, Rachel placed down braised, duck-grilled sea bass and a complex pasta dish, all flawless. Not a single detail missed. No notes required. The table fell suddenly silent. Then she gently placed a small card beside Victor's plate. On it, neat handwriting in both English and German listed every ingredient in detail. "This recipe I learned from the head chef in Hamburg," Rachel said softly in flawless German, "back when you were still a regular guest there." Victor's fork froze midair. Eric stopped laughing, his eyes darting across the card as if it were damning evidence. At the next table, someone whispered, "Did she just mention Hamburg?" Rachel didn't need to hear the reactions. She turned away, the hem of her apron brushing the edge of the table as she walked steadily on. A sophisticated woman with a pearl necklace and a perfectly coiled bun suddenly stopped her. She was a real estate magnate notorious for buying up half of Manhattan and reselling for millions. "Excuse me, girl," the woman said sweetly, but with an edge, "your apron has a stain. How unprofessional." "What do you say to that?" Those nearby chuckled, their eyes scanning Rachel from head to toe, searching for cracks. Rachel looked down at the faint mark barely visible in the golden light. She brushed her hand lightly over it, her face unchanged, and answered calmly, "Thank you for pointing it out." Her gaze lingered on the woman for only a brief second, so sharp it made the woman falter slightly. Then Rachel walked away, leaving behind murmurs. They really should retrain these waitresses. Victor raised his glass, taking a sip, trying to salvage his dominance. He spoke loudly in German, deliberately for nearby tables to hear. Her monthly salary probably couldn't buy this bottle of wine. Eric burst into laughter, drawing attention to their table. Exactly. People like her can only dream of sitting here, but it will never happen. Rachel returned to refill their glasses, her hand steady, unshaken. She didn't answer, simply tilted the bottle, letting the red wine gleam under the light. Eric mocked further, his voice shrill. "Let's bet she's probably never even tasted this wine." The air in the room grew colder. The jazz seemed to pause in everyone's chest. A few guests looked up, uncertain whether to laugh along or remain silent. Rachel carried on moving to clear a dessert plate from a nearby table. Just then, a young businessman in a navy suit with a loosened tie called out boisterously, "Hey, don't you ever get tired of this job? Serving us all night must be miserable, huh?" His table roared with laughter, eyes glinting with amusement. Rachel stopped, plate still in hand. She turned, her voice gentle but clear. "This is honest work." Her steady gaze unsettled the man, his grin fading into an awkward smirk. She turned away, but he tried to salvage his pride with a mutter, "Pretty bold, talking back to a customer." The words spread, pulling more eyes toward Rachel. She set the wine bottle down, her movements slow and deliberate. Then she turned to Victor Langston, eyes locked on him, her voice low but firm. "Mr. Langston," she said in German 2 years ago in Munich, "you instructed the head chef that this wine must be allowed to breathe for exactly 12 minutes, no more." The banquet hall fell utterly silent. Victor's glass halted in mid-air. "I was there that night," Rachel continued, her voice soft yet sharp as a blade. "I remember it very well." The nearby table stopped laughing. The young man in the navy suit lowered his phone, his expression tense. Eric Dalton lowered his head, fingers tapping nervously against his plate, his confidence gone. Rachel turned away, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt as though it could shatter the chandeliers above. A longtime fellow server, Marco, brushed past Rachel in the kitchen and whispered, "You okay? That guy's a real jerk." Rachel only gave a slight nod, the corner of her lips curving faintly in thanks. She said nothing more, just adjusted her apron and stepped back out. But as she passed the bar, she caught sight of a small photo tucked loosely in her pocket, an old picture of her and her mother Maggie, smiling brightly in Central Park golden sunlight glinting off her mother's silver hair. Rachel's fingers grazed the photo. For a moment her steps slowed, then she straightened her back and walked on. In the banquet hall, Victor Langston still refused to back down. He leaned forward, his German words biting each syllable. "Perhaps you once worked as a waitress in Germany, and now you're still just a waitress." Eric immediately chimed in, voice dripping with disdain. "No matter how well she speaks, her station never changes." A wealthy couple nearby exchanged glances. The wife smirked faintly, her eyes glimmering with a hint of false pity. The entire room waited. Rachel stood still, hands clasped before her apron, her face calm. Victor leaned back, his thin smile like a man who had just landed a cruel blow. The air thickened, pressing against everyone's chest. Suddenly, from the next table, a woman in a sleek black dress with dazzling diamond earrings spoke up. "Girl, that watch of yours is a bit outdated. Doesn't really fit in here, does it?" Her friends giggled, raising their phones, as if ready to capture Rachel's humiliation. Rachel glanced down at her wrist. The silver watch with a scratched face. It was her father's keepsake, passed down before he died. She looked up, her voice gentle yet firm. "It still keeps perfect time." A short reply, no explanations added. The woman gave a strained laugh and her friends fell quiet, their smiles fading. Rachel tilted her head slightly, locking eyes with Victor. Then her voice rang out in German, soft as wind, yet sharp as a blade. "How interesting that you say that, because I am the second largest shareholder of Adler Holdings Bank." Her words struck the room like thunder. Victor shot up to his feet, his face pale. Rachel pulled her phone from her pocket, opening an email with the bank's logo clearly showing the board's digital signatures. She didn't hold it up for long, just enough for Victor to see. A gasp came from the next table. The woman in the red dress dropped her spoon, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone to record. Whispers spread like waves. Second largest shareholder Victor gripped the edge of the table, his arrogance gone. Eric Dalton was speechless, his lips pressed tight as though his mask had been torn away. Rachel turned and walked to another table, pouring water as if nothing had happened. But it didn't stop there. A man in a gray blazer, voice, smooth yet laced with mockery, spoke up. "You'd be more liked in this job if you smiled more. Customers prefer a cheerful face." His table nodded in agreement, as if waiting to see Rachel's reaction. Rachel set the pitcher down, her gaze steady. "I only smile when it's worth it." The man froze, his grin vanishing. The entire table fell silent. Rachel walked away, her stride unchanged, leaving behind a stretch of heavy quiet. Victor forced a chuckle, his voice low, challenging. "If what you say is true, then you wouldn't be working here." Eric bobbed his head eagerly. Exactly. Who with that kind of wealth would serve tables? All eyes were on her, but Rachel didn't waver. She looked straight at Victor, her voice soft but clear. "I work here because my mother loves this restaurant's dessert." She gestured toward the corner of the room, where an elderly woman with silver hair sat, her face kind. Margaret Maggie Morgan. Rachel's mother smiled and lifted her hand in a gentle wave. The room turned to look all at once. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, some discreetly wiped their eyes. Victor was speechless, his jaw clenched tight. Eric stared down at the floor. The woman in the red dress quietly put away her phone, her face flushed. The man in the navy suit gripped his wine glass, unable to speak. Rachel didn't wait for a response. She walked calmly back toward the kitchen, her steps steady as though no confrontation had ever occurred. In that moment, the hall was utterly still. Only the faint strains of summer lingered like a breath held too long. That night ended in silence. No one laughed or mocked anymore. As Rachel cleared the last tables, a young couple dressed in luxury yet with hesitant eyes stopped her near the bar. The woman clutched her handbag tightly and whispered, "We saw what you did tonight. You truly handled everything with remarkable composure." The man beside her nodded, his voice sincere. "You've earned our respect." Rachel smiled faintly, her gaze gentle, replying simply, "Thank you." Then she walked away, not lingering, not basking in pride. Yet the admiring eyes of the couple followed her until she disappeared into the kitchen. Memories flooded back. As a child, Rachel would spend hours in her family's vast library listening to her mother Maggie read stories about courage and kindness. Even with everything at her disposal, her mother always reminded her, "Value people, not possessions." That lesson had nurtured Rachel's quiet strength, and when her mother fell ill, she had not hesitated to return, accepting this job for one simple reason: this was the restaurant her mother loved most. For Rachel, there was no need for fame or fortune. Her greatest joy was bringing her mother a slice of chocolate tort and watching her eyes light up with simple happiness. The next day, the story from the restaurant spread like wildfire. A blurry video taken by a guest was posted on social media, attracting millions of views overnight. The caption blazed, "Never judge a person by appearances. This waitress silenced a billionaire." Victor Langston's name instantly became the center of gossip, and not in the way he desired. A financial blog ran the headline, "Adler Holdings Secret Shareholder Exposes Victor Langston in New York." By noon, the news exploded everywhere. Eric Dalton, Victor's assistant, was fired. The information leaked on a business forum. Those who had mocked Rachel that night also faced consequences. The woman in the red dress and her companion were struck off the guest list for countless charity events. No one wanted association after the incident. Richard, the boastful man in the navy suit, lost a major client. The reason given, "We don't like that kind of attitude." Everything unfolded quietly but firmly, as if truth had finally found its way. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted as well. An older man in a slightly wrinkled suit but with kind eyes said softly, as Rachel poured water at his table, "You remind me of my daughter. She never let anyone bully her either." Rachel paused briefly, her hand resting on the pitcher. She looked up, her eyes warm. "She must be a strong woman." He nodded, his eyes glistening. Rachel smiled, then continued her work, but his words lingered in her heart. She never opened her phone to watch the video, never cared for the frenzy of comments online. Each morning, Rachel still rose early, brewed coffee, and sat talking with her mother about small things: the morning sky, a new book. Then she went to the restaurant uniform, neat hair, tidy, the silver watch still ticking steadily at her wrist. She didn't need this job to survive. Her family's wealth and bank shares were more than enough to live in luxury, but she kept at it for Maggie, for the small joy of seeing her mother's smile. From that day, the eyes of the restaurant staff looked at Rachel differently, no longer indifferent or doubtful. Now there was quiet respect. The chefs often set aside tastings from the kitchen for her. Colleagues began to seek her out not just for work questions, but for advice: how to stay calm, how to stand firm when life pushed hard. Rachel never lectured at length. She only smiled, gave short replies, and carried on with her duties. Yet those few words always stayed etched as simple truths. One evening, Jonathan Pierce, Rachel's husband, walked into the restaurant. A tall man, his suit elegant but understated, needing no display. He sat down and said in a deep voice, "I would like to be served by Rachel Morgan." Instantly, the room's atmosphere changed. Conversations halted, eyes turned toward him. Everyone recognized the man, one of the most powerful names in international finance. Rachel stepped out her stride, composed her smile gentle, placing a glass of water before him. Their hands brushed lightly. Jonathan looked up, his gaze tender, and nodded. No words were needed. The woman in the red dress was present that evening too, with another companion. When she saw Jonathan, her face turned pale, her fork slipping softly onto her plate. Richard bowed his head, gripping his glass tightly, unable to look up. Eric was gone, his place taken by a quiet young female assistant who worked diligently. Victor Langston had vanished as well, attending board meetings only via screen-keeping, far from the public eye. Power in that room seemed to have shifted not through money or status, but through something deeper: truth and dignity. On another quiet evening, a little girl of about 10 tugged at her mother's hand, pointing toward Rachel as she poured water in the corner of the room. "Mom, is that the lady from the video, the one who stood up to him?" The mother, in a simple dress, nodded and smiled gently. "Yes, darling, that's her." The girl's eyes lit up as if she were seeing a hero. Rachel overheard faintly, her hand pausing on the tablecloth before she continued, her steps light, but her heart warm. In the days that followed, Maggie Morgan still came regularly to the restaurant. She sat in her familiar corner, her silver hair glowing beneath the chandelier, her smile serene as her daughter brought her a slice of her favorite chocolate tort. The whole room watched them, not with suspicion or pity anymore, but with quiet respect. Rachel didn't need to say anything more. The story had already spread, living a life of its own. It reminded everyone that the true worth of a person is not in clothes, titles, or appearances. One evening, the restaurant manager, Tony, a gruff man rarely seen smiling, called Rachel over. His voice was low, raspy. "I've worked here 20 years, never seen anyone handle a night the way you did." He handed her a small envelope, an extra bonus gathered from the staff tip pool, something that had never happened before. Rachel accepted it, her fingers brushing the paper, nodding, "Thank you, Tony." Then she turned back to her duties, her steps light. Tony watched her go, his eyes glimmering with rare pride. Outside, the repercussions still spread. Eric Dalton tried to defend himself on social media, claiming the incident had been exaggerated, but a flood of harsh comments drowned him. In the end, Eric deleted his account. The woman in the red dress, whose real name was Claire, lost her endorsement contract with a luxury brand. Richard, the hedge fund broker, continued to lose clients. As for Victor Langston, under immense public pressure, he was forced to issue a vague statement about respecting all service staff. But that didn't stop the storm of mockery and scathing articles. Everyone who had mocked Rachel that night paid the price, not because she sought revenge, but simply because truth always finds its way. As for Rachel, her life remained simple. Each morning she woke, brewed coffee, and talked with her mother about the book they were reading. Each afternoon she put on her uniform, the silver watch still ticking steadily at her wrist, and stepped into the restaurant. She never spoke of degrees, wealth, or bank shares. She simply worked quietly, letting her actions speak. One night, an elderly woman in a worn coat with a gentle face sat alone and ordered a cup of coffee. Rachel brought it out, noticing the woman's trembling hands. "Long day?" Rachel asked softly. "A long life." The woman smiled wearily. Rachel placed a small plate of cookies beside her on the house. The woman left behind a crumpled $5 bill and a scrap of paper. "Thank you for seeing me." Rachel folded it and slipped it into her apron pocket. right next to the old photo of her and her mother. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. Staff now looked at Rachel with trust. The chefs saved her samples of new dishes. Younger colleagues asked her how to stay calm, how to stand firm when life pressed hard. And though she always answered briefly, her words lingered like plain truths that needed no embellishment. A few weeks later, Jonathan Pierce returned, this time carrying a modestly wrapped package. He set it on their familiar table, leaving a note in neat handwriting for your mother. It was a volume of poetry Maggie loved. When Rachel saw it, she smiled softly, her fingers brushing the book's cover. Without words of thanks, she tucked it away and went back to her work. The entire room quietly watched, but this time no one whispered or mocked. They all knew who she was, not because of wealth or reputation, but because of the way she carried herself, the way she made others feel seen and valued. The story did not end with a grand finale. It didn't need one. Rachel continued day after day, bringing her mother her favorite tort, living with quiet strength. Those who had humiliated her bore their own consequences. As for Rachel, she had nothing to prove, because truth always shines, no matter how deeply it is hidden. Do you feel it too? That moment when someone looks at you and sees less than who you really are. When they mock, belittle, try to make you small, but you still stand tall. You don't need to shout or prove anything. You just are yourself, and that is enough, always enough. Thank you for following today's story. If you believe that a person's true worth does not lie in appearance or status, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. Leave a comment to share your thoughts. Perhaps your own story could also inspire someone else. While you wait for tomorrow's new story, we've already prepared a few other videos you definitely won't want to miss. They're waiting for you right next door. Wishing you a peaceful day filled with strength and always with the respect you deserve.